Okay.
Did you find your glasses?
She did.
She still has the bag.
No.
That was very,
Oh, wow. What happened? Let's
someone's gonna get seasick watching that.
let's fix that. There we go. Sorry for the folks at home.
Yesterday I was getting ready to leave to go the.
There we go.
I couldn't find the remote to shut off the TV. So I'm going, okay, where have I been?
Okay.
Where have I been? Yeah. Finally found it.
All right, well, we are recording, so hi, everybody. Sorry for the camera adjustments. And no, my daughter does not find her glasses. They're in the house somewhere. There's,
Does she have a spare pair?
she did until we had to cannibalize them to get arm. She got the same pair of frames that she had before. She liked them, so that's cool. But then something snapped or broke or screw fell out, and so they, instead of repairing them with something they had on site, she's like, well, just use the arm for your own. But her eyes actually improved, so the old prescription didn't work.
Oh,
So that's not usually how it goes. Anyway, hi, everybody. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning to the folks watching on video. We got pretty deep last time into the parable of the prodigal son. We walked through the parable, we shared a little background on how everybody in the story really kind of dropped the ball. The father, the prodigal son, the brother, nobody was perfect in this story. We talked about the contrast between the picture of the father in this story, greeting the prodigal son while still far off and welcoming him home. With the parable we did the time before, the unjust judge who the innocent woman had to wear down to get any kind of justice. We talked about what was the cause of this guy's problems. Was it his poor choices and extravagant living and bad spending? Was it from other cultures that I shared from an author who wrote about this, that it was because there was a famine in the land? How could he recover? Is it because no one would help him? Is it, what was the cause of his plight? And we talked about the other two parables that preceded it, both the lost sheep. So, that it would have been this community thing with that many sheep. It would have been a bunch of folks working together. So yeah, you would have dropped everything to find that sheep because you didn't want to make waves or cause problems with the other people in your kind of co-op. And then the one with the lost coin, that was an expensive coin. That was a whole day's wages. And so yeah, you would have told your neighbors, hey, I found the coin that was lost. Let's celebrate, because that was a big deal. And so we talked about what it was, what it felt like. We tried to get into the mindset. What does it feel like to lose something? And then what does it feel like to find it? Then we got to the mindset of what does it feel like to lose someone? But then to possibly find them again. The difference between estrangement, that kind of losing of somebody, but then maybe having that relationship restored and reconciled. But then the different feeling in when you lose somebody who dies. And what does that feel like? So we try to get into the mindset and the emotional space of what does it feel like to lose something? What does it feel like to find it again? And then we had to leave off, but we had a few more questions to get to. And I kind of threw those up there to have you stew on them during the week. So we're going to come back to these other pondering the questions. And at the end of these questions in our discussion, we'll have a little bit of time to say, well, is this a parable that needs updating? The idea of this class has been to take these parables of Jesus that are grounded in the stuff of the people he was talking to, and then having big meetings. So does this parable work now with the stuff of our lives? Or does it need an update? So that's where we're aiming for. And then if we have time, we'll, I think it was Lois who brought up the parable, not the parable, but the cursing of the fig tree.
Yep.
If we have time, we'll get to. Because in some ways, the prodigal son could say, you could say, well, he's a fig tree that didn't produce any fruit. So why didn't he get whammy?
Different lessons.
Different lessons, but maybe the conversation between them can give us something. So, any thoughts from last week before we get into our discussion today?
Stop provoking all of this though. I spent a lot of time thinking, it would pop into my head last week, especially that prodigal son. And how much life is still the same, still have that same family situation all too often.
I've been in congregations with folks who told the story of their adult children who kind of got into addiction, drugs, and they did so much to try to help them and pull them out, and turn them in a different direction. And in a couple of those cases, they said the best thing that we could do, as hard as it was to let them hit rock bottom.
Yeah.
And it was the hardest thing they ever had to do. And then be there for them as they came back. That's something that comes to mind as I've been thinking about this. Okay, well, let's talk some more. Let's continue to provoke some thoughts and see where we end up. I want to come back to the very first part of this sequence. It's Luke 15. We have the parable of the lost sheep, the parable of the lost coin, and then we have this story of the prodigal son. But before any of those stories, the first two verses say, now all the tax collectors and sinners were coming near to listen to Jesus. And the Pharisees and the scribes were grumbling and saying, this fellow welcomes sinners and eats with them. That culture, that gave them honor. That gave them recognition that these Pharisees and scribes don't think they deserve. Okay? So they're grumbling about this, and then Jesus tells these three parables, 1, 2, 3. So let's talk about that contrast. What strikes you between how the Pharisees and scribes see these sinners and tax collectors and what Jesus is saying in his parables? What hits you?
The eternal struggle of the wealthy and fortunate demonizing the less fortunate,
Sure. And even if they're not wealthy, they have.
Stats. Yeah, I was trying to think of,
Yeah.
that's why I threw in.
Now, Jesus goes for the wealthy, but in this case, I'm guessing.
No, but often
Yeah.
you find wealth and privilege go together, and I used to tell kids that I taught, I think I'm rich.
Mhm.
And not by this world's standards, but I have never not known where I was gonna sleep. I have never gone without food, I had parents who loved me all my life. To me, that is true wealth, and even that can give you a sense of, and I noticed this once when I asked a child what his mom would think or something, and his schema, so in education terms, his whole perception of what a mom was black and white different from what mine was. My mother was nurturing, loving, very wise and making us responsible. I mean, she wasn't indulgent necessarily, but I was very blessed. I really was, and I didn't think of it that way when I was a kid.
Mhm.
But for this child, his mother had been a drug addict. She was no longer in his life. He was, with a relative who didn't particularly want to be his guardian. He was doing this out of obligation, not out of, any kind of love. And You know, so that's, it's easy to say, to see somebody begging on the street, which we still do today, and go. It must have become a drug addict, list off all these things, you know what I mean? But we don't know. So, I'm sorry, I'm saying.
There's that expression there, but for the grace of God go I, and
Yes.
that can be meaningful to you, but there's also a little bit of a, well, they're kind of built in to that
You're
expression
right.
sometimes.
I take exception to that, I'll
Okay.
challenge that,
Okay,
because that may be your feeling, but other people may not have that feeling, so like that, but for the grace of God, if you really do. Think about it sometimes, like there's
Yeah.
times we've all had struggles.
Yeah.
Everyone in this room has had struggles in their life,
there's a lot
so
of different
you
ones.
could have easily taken the path
That's
more
right.
travel
Sure.
versus less travel, or vice versa. And so, but for the grace of God, really, we all do that, and, I try not to. I struggle, we all struggle, I think, with not casting the judgment on those people, because it's. And the older I get, the easier it is actually for me not to cast judgment, because when I was young and I knew everything. It was much easier to cast the judgment, and the older I get, the more I realize I know less and less, so I figure 40 years from now, I'll just be a complete moron.
Isn't that an interesting dynamic?
That is so true.
Yeah, I look at that, with the grace of God, go I look more as being lucky and being blessed, that's how I see it.
I guess I was trying to say, I've seen it, I've heard it both ways.
Oh, and I've heard both ways, yeah.
I've heard it in the very humble, self-aware, that could have been me, I'm
Yeah, that's
gonna
how I
treat
see
this person with compassion. But I've also heard it as, well, I'm not that person,
Yeah.
I think a good
But thank you for
comparison,
the challenge.
a good comparison of Jesus coming to be with and to teach the people who needed him. And I think Alcoholics Anonymous. Alcoholics Anonymous comes from a good Christian standpoint. And that might be a way that Jesus is helping them, is through the Bible teaching. And that's what Jesus was spending time with them for, not because he wanted to be drunk and drinking too much. He wanted to help them become passionate.
And so for the Pharisees and scribes, you don't associate with those people.
Right.
Because that brings you down.
Yeah.
And that brings them up when clearly they don't deserve it. But when you hear, like I said last week, these parables don't say the kingdom of heaven could be compared to. But at the end it says, just so I tell you, there will be more joy in heaven over one sinner who repents over 99 righteous people.
That's what kind of AA is about, that repenting.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's what Jesus is coming for. They come from a Christian standpoint.
So, yeah, I mean, what does this teach us about the kingdom of heaven? That there's joy in repentance, reconciliation, restoration.
Jesus wasn't about image either.
Oh, gosh, no.
That superficial shell, he challenged that, the whole, whatever, so he was saying it's more important to be this than to appear like this, right?
Yeah.
So,
So Jesus is here and he's with tax collectors and sinners. And he's also with Pharisees and scribes, they're proximity.
right,
So we hear how where's the shot? We hear how the Pharisees react to Jesus being with them. How do you think the Pharisees reacted to these three parables? I think we get their reaction. Let's say the scribes. So let's leave the Pharisees out of this for a second. Because the Pharisees really were devout students of the law, of the Torah. But the scribes worked along with the chief priests and the elders in the temple. And we know where they ended up, right? They ended up saying, hey, let's get this extra stuff. So how do you think the scribes heard these parables? Yeah.
Maybe they, I don't even understand why
father would do this or I'd do that, so coming from on high. Or they said, somehow he's been digging at me, and I gotta figure out why.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or if you're.
I mean, it's the same way the modern church, big church, or RT church would challenge any new teachings today,
Oh, sure.
right? So if you came across with a new parable or a new teaching or something new, quite frankly, we would put, the overarching church would push back on that. And these were the people that studied hundreds of years, thousands of years of the law, and now they're being told, no, that's wrong.
Yeah.
And so, how would we react?
Thank you.
Exactly, how would we react to that? I mean, you look at, there's incidents where people have taught different things and how the church has reacted to that. So it's a very, I always try to put a modern take on like, how would I think today if someone came and told a story like this?
Yeah.
And I don't think I'd react well. I think it would be a pushback. And that saddens me a little bit that, like, how do you know what the truth, new truth would be coming to us?
I think that would be a challenge. It's new to-
Yeah, but if Jesus came back today, would the church, the overarching, big capital C, welcome him?
Right.
Don't think it would.
I struggle, yeah.
I don't think so, because I think they, so much for whatever the public opinion is, and a lot of what Jesus may say is a public opinion, so they're not gonna go that way.
Yep.
Well, I mean, we have folks that lose their minds over what style of music you have in worship. Or having a screen versus a bulletin.
Uh-huh.
Some folks just grumble, but some folks genuinely are upset. And they're saying this takes away the foundation of what I believe and how we're supposed to worship. They'll leave, go someplace else.
I remember when we went from one hymn to the next. It was.
So there's that.
Yeah,
And then, there was this trend, and I think it's maybe still going or maybe fading, but it's called the emergent church or the emerging church. And they try to do church in a very different way. So, for instance, we visited one in Minneapolis that was called Solomon's Porch, which was part of the temple. And it was just a big old room, all were welcome, you sat on couches around a circle. For the most part, I'm like, okay, I can dig this, and then they got to communion. And instead of having a line or anything, it was, there's tables set up around and there's some bread and there's some wine, you can go and kind of get something. And there was no like formal residence. So like,
No,
here it is, like have some bread or some wine, or whatever, and to me, that was just like, that I found my line, like, a little loosey goosey. But who's to say that Jesus wouldn't come and be like, hey, that's cool.
Yeah.
Like, but if, there's congregations that minister specifically, like, for instance, where Pastor Lou is now. In Fredericksburg, the senior pastor there, Pastor Ann Martin, I think.
Yeah, you're right.
They're working with a bunch of other churches of other denominations to do this Micah ministry. I can't remember the name, but they've started a separate congregation supported by all of these that specifically ministers to the large homeless population in Fredericksburg. And there's worship services, but there's also services, right? Clothes, food, and things.
Do they have it in church?
I think it's somewhere by the river, I want to say. I don't
They've
know.
done it for several years,
Yeah.
'cause I remember quite a few years ago, somebody came and was talking about it. Yeah, yeah, at that time they were meeting just in a building
Yeah.
down on Main Street, they weren't in a church. But
I think that's still the case, maybe.
I don't know, because it was several years ago I heard about
It's
it.
on the Synod website, if you wanna check it out, it's one of the ministries that our mission supports. And so, but there are gonna be folks, there's another one in North Carolina, the pastor there spoke at the youth gathering. And they also minister especially to folks who were addicts, who are recovering, to homeless people. She told this beautiful story, sad story about this guy who always came to church, and he was just known as, I think, the captain or something, but he had no ID. And then the system is, if you are homeless, you have to prove who you are, but you can't prove who you are without an address.
Yeah.
So he was caught, so they worked really hard to get him an ID, and then like a few weeks after he finally got it, he's like, I'm not like, I'm somebody, right? And then a few weeks later, something happened and he died. But he died somebody.
He died
She
somebody.
had this very powerful message. And so, but there are these congregations that don't fit the normal mold.
Mhm.
And some people really love them, and some people are like, why are we wasting our support and our money on this with those people? Right? This is a waste.
Well, I'm
So it
gonna-
could be something as frivolous as a style of music, but it could be something.
That's just what Jesus did. That's just what Jesus did.
So I totally agree
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
Jesus could come
Oh, yeah.
and say, what are you guys doing? And we'd be like, this is how we do it. But our systems, our structures.
Guilty.
I heard there's a thing out there, like, sort of a lot of you have heard of Jelly Roll, he's on the very, very controversial looking. Like,
Because of the face
oh, you
tattoos.
see face tattoos, he's very rough looking,
There's a-
but he has some of the most. I'm gonna say Christian lyrics in popular music right now, if you listen to some of his music. And the style is not my normal style of music at
Who
all.
is that?
His name is
Jelly
Jelly Roll, it is,
What kind of music is it?
it's country rap. Of
Well,
all things, it is.
But they're playing a lot of it on like the top 40.
Yeah.
That's an unusual
It's
version.
very unusual, but his lyrics are sweet. He comes from a place of addiction. His wife was a former prostitute, and he talks openly about this in his music and his outreach to Christianity. And he's the one who really brought up. He's like, my wife and I go to churches, and she's looked down upon because of her past. And I'm looked down upon by my past, and we can feel it in the congregation. So we leave. And it's like, man, that hit home because I can just see myself being that judgmental person. I know it in my heart.
It's very brave to come around and say that.
I mean, we all have it.
Yeah, oh, yeah.
And sometimes
Yeah, but I
that's
mean, most people
yeah.
wouldn't have
Everybody
done that.
has something that they're gonna
Right, yeah.
react to.
Oh, yeah,
Everybody's got a bias.
Yeah,
yeah.
So that's a segue to the second half of this question. Okay, so the Pharisees and scribes' reactions to these parables.
I
Okay,
I was in at choir the other day and Pat, I think, brought up that a friend of hers, no, it was him. Had just called her and said, I'm not going to church next Sunday. She said they have the altar covered with witches and I don't know, stuff like that on the altar. I guess it was the youth group that did that. I suppose about a month ago.
Sure.
You know, that she wasn't gonna go to church because of that,
Yeah.
which I can kind of, to me, for me, anyway, that would be hard.
so yeah, on the one hand,
Yeah.
what are these symbols? These aren't church, but on the other hand, if it makes the youth feel.
Yeah,
Yeah, did she listen to, there was probably an explanation for it, that maybe she.
There may have been.
And she didn't listen to it, and she just closed her mouth.
yeah.
yeah.
So yeah, everybody's got
But
that.
change is hard, I think it's harder the older you get,
Yeah.
you know, I've noticed.
No, I think I've got more liberal the older I get.
Oh, but I mean,
I got more acceptance,
like, well, I was taught to be very.
Little L liberals,
a little elderly or.
little L liberal, or like,
There you go.
Oh.
Or is it all the same?
I'm not something where people can do,
yeah,
you know, with 5 grandkids will all go their own way and do their own thing and, you know, it's like.
When
If I'm not the judge, it's, you know, it's their life.
Yeah.
And also
and
working
you
at,
wanna be a part of it.
and let's get it at MSAC. I mean, you can't believe all the different people we have in. And if you sit and talk to them, you know, a lot of them are really very sweet, very nice, fun,
Sure.
but their lifestyle isn't something that I would have chosen.
Sure.
So maybe they didn't choose it either.
But the whole
You know,
thing
you
went by everything.
get out and do charity work, let me tell you, it really changes your outlook on a lot of things.
People who go on mission trips, whether it's
Yes, that's what they.
across town or across the world,
Right,
they think they're gonna go and I'm gonna help people. And most of the time, they come back going, oh my gosh, this changed me.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
help me see something. Okay, flip side of the question. So I think we've covered how the Pharisees and scribes reacted to these 3 parables. How do you think the sinners and tax collectors reacted to these 3 parables? Because as far as we know, according to the first couple verses, they're right there. How do you think the sinners reacted to these 3 parables? Now, so let's use a Lutheran lens. Do you think they heard law? Oh, we're the lost sheep, we're the lost coin, or do you think they heard gospel? We will be rejoiced of.
Think of grace.
I think both. I think some of them probably heard one, some probably heard the other. There's, you know.
But Jesus is talking about them.
Right.
Jesus isn't saying, be like this. He's saying, these lost ones will be found.
I would think that they would kind of feel like they weren't worthy to have somebody like that speak to them,
Sure.
that somebody was so much better than them, or, teaching things. And they knew they weren't living up to that,
They would have known the
So-
culture too. Yes.
so they could probably feel a little unworthy and
But Jesus.
not.
That's what I was gonna say,
Yeah.
they felt like he was one of us, that's what I think.
So,
Not that they're worthy, I think he said, we found somebody that's one of us, so they'd see.
I mean, there's probably like the seeds in the path, right? The ones that took root, the ones that were shallow. And then some of them just didn't sprout at all. I mean, it was probably, it's a collection of people, so it's probably the same as a church service today.
We know
Maybe
that,
they know you're filming their boss,
yeah,
so it doesn't bother them at all.
Yeah.
Figure out what he's talking about, because I'm not lost, I know exactly what I'm doing.
Yep.
but they're still coming to hear him. Something about Jesus made them want.
Maybe it's just because somebody said about what this is great, so they come to see what great is.
Yeah,
Yeah, we're not throwaways. You got some value, like you said.
yes,
Yeah.
or even if everybody else looks down on us.
Some farther away.
We've talked about the last few weeks how Jesus will use exaggeration in the parables, right? We have the algebra graph, hyperbole. Okay,
I'd say
do you think the reaction in these three parables, so call the people together for the lost sheep and rejoice, there'll be more joy in heaven. The woman has the coin, rejoice with me. There's more joy in the presence of angels of God over one sinner who repents. The father with the prodigal son sees him, it's like, put the robe on him, put the ring on him, show everybody in the town that I support him. Party, kill a fatted calf, sorry brother, he was dead, now he's back again. Are these exaggerations? Are these like when Jesus said, and the other parables, for instance, what have we talked about?
Well, I agree, because I think they were exaggerations, because like the camel through the eye of the needle, they were all exaggerations to prove a point. So I think, or knock your eye out, that, or
Oh, yeah.
that's wrong.
You're getting across the
So,
same-
they're all exaggerations to prove a point, so, and I think they recognized at the time that would have been an exaggeration. But you were asking a little bit earlier why everybody would show up. I think not only did they feel like he was one of them, but a lot of curiosity.
Oh, sure.
So, not everybody that went there became followed. They
Yeah.
came there to be nosy.
Yeah, he had crowds following him everywhere he went, but it's not like he left ghost towns behind him. It's not. Yeah, I mean, anybody else on the exaggeration bit?
Well, that was a hard one for me to accept, that all these stories that are really, you can't understand them. Our son said, when he was little one day, Mom, he said, this Jonah swallowing this whale. He says, this is a little hard to believe. But, all those tales are hard to believe. And if you're looking for something, and if you're looking for something new in your faith, then you might look at that positively and try to build from it. But if you're happy in your solid, this is the way we worship, we're not gonna change it, then you're not gonna see anything there. It will be to you just a bunch of words, I think.
Lutherans aren't known for large displays of emotion.
No. We never told you that.
Do we, on even a Lutheran level, exhibit, I'm not gonna say feel, I'm gonna say exhibit joy over the lost being found?
Yeah, you're not gonna see us doing a kumbaya, no.
No.
That's enough because I'm wide open definition of what joy could look like.
Well, sometimes you want us to keep quiet because we don't want to be embarrassed by things that keep that wrong, we won't embarrass others and so on.
Okay.
When my
So you're not gonna be jelly roll getting up and
No.
talking about him and his wife and their
Right.
plans. Like, well, you know, we're glad you're here, but we don't want to.
Yeah.
when my daughter went to that Christian church over here, she wanted me to come to a youth gathering with her. Felt like Moby Dick out of water. I felt so embarrassed and
A little,
uncomfortable.
a little more demonstrative. I would say.
Yeah, I couldn't deal with it. And I never went again. It wasn't, I couldn't do it.
Do you think that's, I don't know if this is true or not, I feel like maybe it is a little bit. Do you feel like that's one of the many reasons why churches like the Lutherans, Methodists, Episcopalians have been fading in numbers for decades?
Absolutely.
Because we don't seem to know how to express and exhibit joy. Or if it's there, people are missing.
I have a problem with that in one way.
Yeah.
In some of those churches like that,
Mhm.
they were very good at evangelizing.
Mhm.
Beautifully. But they had a turnover like the damn door was in the rotating.
Mhm.
So I don't see.
Yeah.
That much.
There's a balance there, and
Yeah.
I use the Baptist, Southern Baptist as an example. They celebrate their faith more and more openly.
Mhm.
And they are still a very strong church body.
Yeah.
They're still fading, but they're not fading.
Right.
Some of their reasons, and they're more rigid, they're more, we use the term conservative
Yeah.
in their faith.
On the whole.
On the whole.
Yeah.
And
Or
that's,
we are.
and that's driving people that would, you would think drive more people away,
Mhm.
but because they celebrate openly, because they.
Mhm.
Evangelize in their own community and outside, and they're encouraged to. There's a lot of things I think draw people into that open community where they are more apt to share feelings. And I couldn't do it. It'd be so foreign to me. I mean, I might as well try to speak Swahili as to try to do that. I'd be more comfortable.
I mean, what would it be like if we had testimonies in church?
Oh, it would be weird.
But if we had people get up and tell their story and just say, tell about a time when you experienced grace.
Mhm.
Tell about a time when you saw God at work and it brought you joy. That could actually really,
Well, think about it.
not everybody's gonna feel comfortable doing that, right? Because it's body of Christ, right? Different gifts for different people.
Jeff, where did you do that one time?
I was gonna say, I think I remember a season that we were doing that.
Yeah. I thought it was you, but maybe it's not.
I don't remember.
I remember Jack.
Yeah.
Had the story, I think I said this once before, where the church in Lynchburg, we had a sister church in North Carolina, in black.
Yep. Yep.
And we swapped pastors,
I know.
and he would get up there and he would say,
Where's my amen?
he would say something, and he'd stop.
Amen.
And
Yeah.
Tony did, and he just stand there and
Some
said,
people-
all right, I'm waiting. And we all looked at him, where's my amen? And we'd say, nah, that's not an amen, you know? So it was really, I mean, he was trying to really pull, he was trying to pull a person through an eye of a needle, and it just didn't work.
So let's ask it this way. One of the questions I threw out last week was, is prodigal the right adjective? We looked it up, and it was, you know,
Spending.
extravagant.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Huh.
if Lutherans are all about being very honest about our sinfulness, right? We cannot be saved by our own works, we're saved by grace. It's Reformation Day, you know, so it's Lutheranism in there. Is prodigal the right adjective to use to define this person only by his worst mistake? Or is there, maybe that's part of the update of this parable, is the adjective that
It's
it's
called normal.
what, normal?
The prodigal son he's not a bad person.
Yeah.
I mean, he was willing to work hard. He was willing to, when he lost everything.
Yeah.
He went and fed the pigs,
Yeah.
and he wanted to eat the pig's feed, but he wouldn't. He was clearly honest, so he was raised right, you know, there's a lot of things, and he was also humble enough to go back
He
and.
was ready to go back and say, I won't even be a son.
Yeah.
I'll just-
Be a servant. Yeah, he was humble enough to admit, I mean, there's a lot of things that are good about the lost son, as my book calls, like the prodigals.
Which makes sense, lost sheep, lost coin, lost
Yeah.
son.
That's
Right. But he was very extravagant, and it's like I've heard this story in many different versions of myself. And, you know, well, that's what I think too, right, to a certain extent, it's like a story of growing up, like,
Yeah.
my dad's got all this money, look how we live. We could be doing these things, and, you know, and goes out and does those things and then realizes, hey, this isn't what it's all cracked up to be, you know? And I had it way better off there, you know? I think I've lived something of a life like that, I mean, we're not going into detail, because I am perfect. But, you know, I mean, I was not an easy kid, my mom said, you know, I got twins like on purpose, you know, like, you know. Her first,
child?
no, I was the youngest, but my brother and sister who were the oldest were held accountable not only to do the right thing, but they get in trouble twice because they're setting a bad example. For me and Michael. And Michael and I were the ones who really
You're the oldest one, you should know better.
that we were not spoiled, we were,
Oh.
not even that, I mean, I think it was like, there were expectations for us as well, but I think my parents focused so much on, like, they were so hard on John and Chris. John and Chris were coming up for us. You know, I mean, like, wow, you know.
Maybe they relaxed their parenting.
Well, they got out one
Kenny calm down.
Anyway, but you know, I came to really appreciate my mom and dad, and one of my fondest memories of a conversation with my mother is when she told me, you are our most appreciative child. Because I started to express that to them, you know, thank you so much for this, for that. When I went back to school, full-time working, had twins, etc., getting my master's degree, you know, stepkids, all that. I called them and I was like, I wanna thank you for putting me through college, because, you know, I didn't have to work then, and I never appreciated that gift until I was juggling all these things, you know, so, and I think that made me appreciate them. Anyway, that, I see this as a tale of maturity now. You know, I don't know what I saw it as previously, because as you hear these things and you incorporate it, yeah, exactly, it's, you know, but it's a very rich story.
It is, and what is grounded in this are family dynamics,
Yeah.
maturity, knowing what it is like to have somebody or something be lost and found again. All these things we've been talking about, maybe what is grand in this parable is that God's extravagant grace is a measure, is a magnitude higher than the extravagant waste. So God's grace is magnitude higher
Yeah.
than whatever we could do.
Are you the pastor who I learned
Keep that up.
from to his child in that manner would have been undignified? Or was that someone?
I did talk, I'm sure I've talked about it.
But I, you know, like,
Probably
even
not.
that element, and I think that's why the exaggeration is important in these stories, because they get the attention of these people.
Yeah, if you just say
Yeah.
to somebody, God's full of grace, awesome.
Yeah.
But if you tell a story,
Yeah, what
and
if
you
you
say, here's the low, low, and here's the high, high,
Yeah,
that's in the series. One more thing before we get to the last question here. Any thoughts on the older son? It's just like the story, we've kind of just gone right past it. So any thoughts on the older son who never was? You could say, and these folks say that he accepted his part of the inheritance too, you know, basically. But he has some justification, I would say, saying, I didn't get
Completely
it.
understand.
Huh?
Completely understand.
yeah, I think we're looking at that question.
If I was in that same way, I know I would.
I think it also is how much older is that older son?
Yeah.
Is he 10 or 12 years older, or is he 2
You
years?
couldn't say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I don't know, because, you know, the oldest son can say, you know, I've been around, it's good, and I understand what it is to go nuts. Now, if he's close in age, well, I didn't do that, you know, so it could be.
I get the impression they must be closer in age because there seems to be more tension there, and
Right.
in my experience, the closer they are in age. Or if the sibling, well, actually, the twins are good. But
Especially because they're boy.
But like a year or two apart, much more of this than if it's like 4 or 6 years apart, then it's like, whatever, you know, you're.
Yeah, so.
We haven't got there.
But maybe it's different for every family.
When I was growing up, my brother was 18 months younger than me, and if I said white was black, he'd agree with it. And,
Right.
and now my kids are 6 years apart, and my son was holy terror emotionally on my daughter. Oh, he never touched her physically.
Both are.
He was
He's a
brutal when it comes to, emotion.
Receptive being there.
Yeah,
Yeah, I have a little bit of that.
but now they now reconciled that, because as they got older, you don't see that separation so much, you know, but when they were young, he never touched her, boy. Emotionally, he would just, you know, oh, he'd be a terror.
That's older sibling, I think.
Liz's sister, maybe a cousin, were trying to convince her that there had been a third kid. That something about Liz was, because of Liz, they had to give him over to, they were trying to mess with her head or something.
My brother said that to me, right?
Yeah. Right, any other thoughts on the older son?
Oh, I just have thoughts on both of them.
Yeah.
At the end of the story doesn't end there.
Yeah.
The story in the young man that the prodigal son, what's called the normal son. When he comes back home, it's good if he's encouraged to tell his story, because his story is a gift back to God again. You know, and he's telling other people. Yesterday on TV, there was a fellow who just, I don't know how long he's been out of prison, he's been there 20 years. He belonged to a gang in New York City or Chicago and committed, I don't know what, but he was telling this story. And boy, I think hearing that story is wonderful, so I just want, hope there's a responsibility to do that at the end of the story.
Was that the guy, there's Run Baby Run was, the cross and switchblade. And then Run Baby Run, like, the cross and switchblade was a priest who ministered in Harlem, and then is it Run Baby Run?
I have no idea.
You're not familiar with this?
Are these books? Are they
Yeah,
movies?
they're books, they're Christian books,
Okay.
I remember getting them.
Don't,
In the church I grew up in, they had like books that you could read, I remember getting them there. Yeah, but the guy got across the switchblade, that priest went into like Harlem, ministering to these gang members, and then one of those gang members testified about the change in him, and that's what I think. Yeah,
I mean, most of you, I think, were here when we read Tattoos on the Heart.
Right.
yeah, oh yeah, similar to that, yes.
So we started with all the tax collectors and sinners were coming here to listen to Jesus. Curious, felt like he was one of them, but whatever the reason. And the Pharisees and the scribes grumbling, saying, "This fellow welcomes sinners and eats with them." Then we get 3 parables, and the end of the last parable, Jesus' last word in this story, we don't get the following reactions, we don't get anything else. But the last word of the last parable is, the father said to the older son, "Son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. But we had to celebrate and rejoice, because this brother of yours was dead and has come to life. He was lost and has been found." There's the last word of the parable. There's the parallel to the first 2 that said there'll be rejoicing, more joy in heaven over one lost sinner who's bad. So that's the last word here. That's the extravagant grace. You're gonna celebrate the person who was dead and came back to life, who was lost and was found. At least more publicly, more ostentatiously, than you are the person who was always with you. And that could feel like a shot to the person who didn't do anything wrong.
Or felt they did everything right.
Well, yeah.
I remember this arguments in our household. You probably had them in your household too. No arguments between brothers who was the best, did the most. Food, so.
Well, absolutely, all the time. I did this, he's,
Yeah, that's not good. Okay, back to the question then. Is there an updated version of this parable needed? What would you do to this parable to make it?
Circumstances the same today as they were then. I don't see any reason to change it, because It parallels today. I mean,
Parable of the lost coin, I would change the parable of the lost son.
Oh,
the lost one.
The lost son.
Oh, yeah. Lost sheep, yeah.
That would have, the lost son would hit harder.
yeah.
You're right.
Oh. Thanks.
There you go.
Great.
There you go.
I'm trying to make this fit, and I'm just not there. So, okay, the parables of the weeds and the parables of the seeds and the parables of, what else have we talked about? The widow, like that. Some of these are such a completely different culture or system, like most folks that you talk to today are not. Even if they are in agriculture, they're using combines, right? They're not,
Mhm.
you know,
But they still understand.
they still understand, but we're not talking sheep and seeds with people. If I got up and just started doing, you know, farm-based parables and stories, I'd lose a lot of people. I was in a preaching class, well, I wasn't, but I heard the story from senior year. Somebody was preaching, we had these small groups and the other folks could hear feedback. And one of the persons said, well, we all heard the expression, you know, knee high by the 4th of July or something like that. And something about the corn, that high as an elephant.
High as an elephant.
High as an elephant's eyes.
Yeah.
And 3/4 of the class were like, no, we don't. Like, we don't all know that expression. You can't lead with that unless you really know. So just, you know your audience.
Yeah, exactly.
So other ones that we've talked about, we would have to update, right? That somehow, if we wanted to have the same pop, make it so that people would be brought along with your story. But what I'm hearing is this one still holds up.
I think it does.
Maybe we change the prodigal adjective to lost or something.
Yeah.
Oh,
Send you this one.
Okay.
Just a quick Google search of something and it's like, oh wow, there's a new way to look at the lost sheep parable.
okay. I think we're gonna pause. Instead of starting the next thing, let's pause there. I like what Lois asked last week about the fig tree. Because as that sat with me, what's the expression? Actions speak louder than words. Parables are stories. But Jesus did a lot of things publicly that had just as much of an impact, if not more, than some of the parables. So can you think of any live action parables? Like we've got the fig tree cursing. I don't think we can spend a whole hour on that. Are there any other things that Jesus did that are like a live action parable that you'd like to start talking about?
The let he who is without sin cast the first stone. For the woman else but
Oh, yeah.
sin.
Hey,
You say,
The one that when he said let he who
When they
has
were gonna stone the woman.
stone the woman,
Who
the
was a
adulterous woman.
prostitute. Or whatever.
Yeah, whichever
I think
Bible
you're
you're
right.
reading, whichever Bible you're reading,
Yeah.
I think it's different.
Or maybe modern day, if you live in a glass house, also.
Yeah.
any others?
Well, the woman who touched his cloak.
Oh, the
Yeah.
hemorrhaging one?
Oh, yeah.
Never spelled that word. Maybe one more. It's quick hits next week.
The employer hands out money to his employees.
And gave them like.
The guy from over there.
Not the same.
All the wages in the field.
Yeah,
Yeah, we can make sure we do that as a parable. I kind of feel like we're just gonna ride these to happen. So we can do the parable of the equal wages that makes people mad.
That frustrates me.
Yeah,
That's always hard.
Yeah, I think it's supposed to.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, that one's supposed to be a burr in your saddle.
Mhm.
Man, I can't poke a hole in this one.
well, it's just like the prodigal, in my opinion, or not just like, but similar in that. The people that were there early and are this, like, I mean, it's like saying,
It's
it's
like the older son, it's the people who worked all day.
Yeah.
right, exactly, you already knew the value of living this life.
It's
Versus the person who had to go out and prove to himself that these other things were not good for you. I think you need both types of people.
The kingdom of heaven is like a family where one brother got it early on, and did what he was supposed to. And the other brother had to go out and make mistakes and learn it the hard way. Both were still loved by their father.
But
Yeah.
you're talking about the one with the wages, you can look at it from the other side, so it's where the manager says, it's my money, I do what I want.
Exactly.
Exactly.
It's your problem, guy.
Then I gotta go back to the book of Job, it's because I'm God and I say so.
Yeah. But yeah, it could be that way, you know, it's my money, I do what I want with it.
Exactly.
So,
I gotta say, I want. Thank you to Susie for saying, hey, let's do parables and giving me that book that she had some good discussion questions in it. But I gotta say, I have been enjoying these conversations and just kind of dunking ourselves in these parables and swimming around in it and seeing what they do. I hope that these are staying with you into the week. And I hope that beyond looking at these, that maybe you're also looking around in the world around you. Not to update a parable, but what are the parables unfolding around you? What stories is Jesus telling in your world right now that are individual to you, but maybe you could share that story. It could tell something about the kingdom. So I hope this is having an impact. It is for me. Thank you all again for sharing today. And we'll do some live action parables next week.
I always do that.